Hi, everyone. My name is Russell Lehmann. I'm a thought leader, poet, speaker, advocate. I just happen to have autism. My thoughts on Mental Health Awareness Week in October. I hope that during this week of awareness, we begin to talk about what's not talked about. I feel so often when it comes to mental health, we talk about anxiety and depression, and with COVID, isolation and maybe burnout, but rarely do we touch upon the severity of mental illness. And even the words mental illness, mentally ill, they just sound wrong coming off the tongue, right? But it shouldn't sound wrong. It only sounds wrong because we rarely say it. And when we do say it, mentally ill is usually used in a negative connotation. But if I have the flu and I say, oh, I'm ill, there's no negative connotation behind that. So what do I hope gets talked about is the severity that mental illness can bring to an individual and their friends and family, and then the ripple effect throughout the community and society at large. Let's start talking about severe mental illness, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, bipolar. I mean, let's just not make it cute and talk about anxiety and depression and things that most people can relate to. Let's talk about those illnesses that most people cannot relate to. Because if we don't talk about what's not talked about, the stigma gets much stronger and builds a more solid foundation to grow upon. I mean, we need to eradicate stigmas, not build them up. And the only way to eradicate stigmas is to talk about what's not talked about. So let's talk about hallucinations. Let's talk about post traumatic stress attacks. Let's talk about wanting to run away from yourself, but realizing that you can never do that. Let's talk about the agony that mental illness brings into one's life, and that even if somebody has the same diagnosis as another, it's all about how that individual perceives their mental illness and how it affects them. It is relative. Just because I have OCD, just because I have PTSD, I have autism, I have so many comorbidities on top of my autism diagnosis, does not mean that I experience the same struggles that someone else with the exact same 5 or 6 diagnoses might experience. Let's realize that when we talk about anxiety, depression, panic, grief, phobias, I mean, let's talk about the entirety, the totality of the human condition. That's basically what we need to talk about, whether that's on one end of the spectrum, hallucinating, right? Maybe hearing voices, seeing things. On the other end, it's something we all experience, whether maybe grief, because grief is mental health too, something that we will all experience at one time or another. There's a spectrum. So let's not just talk about the cute stuff that's easy to talk about. Let's talk about the tough stuff. Because again, if we don't talk about what's not talked about, we bottle that up. And it always boggles my mind that suffering might just be the one thing all humans have in common, the experience of suffering. Yet for some reason, it is also the one thing we choose not to talk about with one another. Thus, we keep it to ourselves and we feel all alone, when in actuality, that person sitting next to us on the plane might be struggling with the same exact struggles that we are, but we're just not talking about it. Right? So let's have a dialogue. Let's have a back and forth. If you don't understand, ask me. But I can only tell you what mental illness is like from my perspective, from Russell's point of view. So don't take my point of view and generalize it onto the whole mental health community. Right? The only life we'll ever come close to knowing is our own. We will never know what it's like to live in somebody else's shoes. And while we can imagine what it's like for somebody else to live with these struggles, there's a philosophical paper titled, What is it like to be a bat? It's by the philosopher Thomas Nagel. And in essence, he goes on to say that we can picture what it is like to be a bat, a winged creature, right? We can picture that. But that's not the question. The question is, what is it like for that bat to be a bat? So so it's not about me as Russell trying to figure out what it's like for Dave to struggle with his mental health, because I'm still using my subjective experience to try to imagine what it's like for Dave to experience his mental health struggles. But the question is, what is it like for Dave to experience those struggles? Not me thinking as Dave, right? So I'm getting into the weeds here, but that's how complex mental health and mental illness is because we take words at face value and we don't look underneath them to realize that any situation in life is relative. And even though some people can have the same diagnosis, the severity all depends on that individual's perception. That's what it boils down to, perception and perspective. So I can imagine what it's like for Dave to struggle, but only Dave will know what it's like for Dave to struggle, right? So let's remember that and take care of yourself during this week of awareness and throughout the year, because it's not enough just to have May as an awareness month or this week in October as an awareness week. We need this year round because at one time or another, we are all going to struggle with our mental health. And the more we can learn about it, the more we can preemptively take the steps necessary in order to handle this stressful situation with better coping mechanisms. Thank you very much.